friends, welcome back or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum, and in today's video I want to do my July wrap up. So I want to talk about all the books I read in the month of July and how they went for me. And also, since I didn't do a TBR video at the beginning of this month, usually I will, I didn't really have a ton of filming time earlier in August, I will quickly mention at the end of this video what my August reading plans are as well. But let's go ahead and jump into what I read in July first. And I managed to finish out 5 books. And the first of those was Dating and Dragons by Christy Boyce. And that is the sequel to Dungeons and Drama. But honestly, I'm not really quite sure why these 2 books are in the same series, because while they are both set in Ohio and they're both young adult romances that feature characters playing D&D, they were set in a completely different city. There was no Easter eggs or character overlap. Like, you could really read each of these completely separately. So yeah, didn't quite understand why they were in a series. But Dating and Dragons features the forced proximity or kind of like forbidden romance trope. So essentially in this one, you have our main character Quinn, and she is new to town and gets invited by a girl at school to join in on this D&D group. This group is a bit more serious than her last group, so she's kind of intimidated by that at first. And they also have some pretty specific rules, like no dating the other members in the group, because they stream and they don't want any kind of like extra drama to ensue. They also have required attendance and no phones during the game, that kind of stuff. So they're a bit more intense. But obviously this is going to be an issue for her when she develops a crush on one of the other members, and her meddling grandmother keeps thrusting them together in various situations. So I definitely had a really good time with this one and gave it a 4-star rating. I thought that there were elements of this one that were better than the first book, but overall I still enjoyed the first book better. In this one, I did really like that we got to kind of explore the D&D campaign happening a little bit more. I felt like in book 1 that was kind of lacking, and there were just like odd random mentions of things, whereas in this one we actually got a little bit more of a storyline towards the D&D campaign, which was nice. And I also really liked the side characters in this one more. I really enjoyed meddling grandma, of course, and just kind of a lot of the family dynamics that the main character had outside of this D&D group were enjoyable to read about. But also I've kind of felt like this overall romance progressed a little bit more slowly than I would have liked. I'm all for a slow burn, but at some point this one just kind of started feeling a little bit repetitive until we got there. And then once we did get there, I felt like we didn't really have enough time with the couple as a couple. I thought that we deserved a little bit more payoff of having them together after all the buildup of this book, for sure. My other kind of teeny tiny complaint with this one was that some of the dialogue that the characters had felt kind of like older than what the characters were portrayed as. So yeah, I thought that aspect wasn't wholly realistic, but overall still had a really good time reading this one and definitely would recommend it. And yeah, gave it a 4-star rating. Next up, I picked up Autobiography by Christina Lauren. And this was a bit of an interesting experience for me because I like their books, but this was YA and I had basically only read their adult work so far. So I was curious to see how this would go. Essentially in here, you follow the story of Tanner, and he is a bisexual teen who's out to his family. He grew up in California, kind of in a more progressive culture, but their family has very recently picked up and moved to a very Mormon city in Utah because of his mom's job. And so his parents kind of think like maybe it's not the greatest idea for you to be out to your friends here. And he's totally fine with that until he develops a very strong crush on his very Mormon TA in his writing class, Sebastian. So this was a really good reading experience for me. And I thought that this had really interesting commentary on how churches and just like a more conservative society viewed LGBTQ individuals and relationships with those individuals, especially if you were kind of coming from the church. I definitely appreciated how this showed like how challenging that could be and kind of what that experience could be like. And I also did think that there was commentary in here that even applied to straight relationships that happen with individuals outside the church culture. I definitely appreciated kind of the unique considerations that the authors really had to think about and kind of dig into for this story. And I do kind of feel like it's a bit of a product of its time, and even maybe has things that were kind of like more applicable before this was even released. even. Like, I'm not quite sure if this would be the same experience today, but definitely still an interesting one to read about, especially for somebody who was around in the 2000s, 2010s, and like knew about that kind of stuff and had heard kind of horror stories about experiences that other people had had. I definitely felt like this story was super realistic. Like, this could have been something that really happened and it wouldn't have surprised me one bit. I think because of the subject matter they tackled, this definitely reads a little bit more serious in tone compared to their other books, but I definitely still appreciated that they did this one. I definitely think there's a lot of strong elements to it, and I enjoyed my time with it, so I gave it a 4-star rating. Next up, I picked up and read The Boyfriend by Frida McFadden, and this was interesting because I had been wanting to try out one of her books and hadn't yet. So when my library hold of this came in, I jumped at it and decided, hey, I'm going to jump into this, and I'm really glad I did. So essentially in here you follow the story of Sydney, and she is a single woman living in New York, and she's kind of going through the horrors of the dating scene. But one day she runs into somebody who she develops a lot of interest in, and things seem to be going great, but there are kind of some like red or orange flags creeping in, and eventually she starts to kind of worry if he actually may be a serial killer. So that gets to be really interesting, and obviously you can see how that becomes a thriller scenario. So I thought that this was a super compelling read, and I really understood why Frida McFadden was so popular after reading this one, because her writing is definitely compelling and her stories are easy to follow. It was definitely really easy to get absorbed into the story, and I definitely was along for the ride and really enjoyed the multiple reveals and twists that were in this one. I liked that she decided to tell this one in multiple timelines, and I definitely appreciated both timelines equally in here because I felt like we had interesting questions and things to wonder about in both timelines simultaneously. It did take a little bit at the beginning to kind of get into both. I feel like the pacing was slightly slower because we had to kind of get integrated and invested in both timelines, but definitely the payoff was worth it, and I had a fantastic time reading this one. The only kind of niggling complaint I had with this one is that she definitely put some details in the story that were kind of like intentional red herrings to fool the reader, and I thought like if that kind of hadn't been there, or if there were like other things that didn't feel like so specific as like potential red herrings where it was like obvious that was what she did in hindsight, that I kind of would have enjoyed this more, because it almost felt like she purposely tried to mislead you in certain moments. And yeah, I didn't necessarily love that, but overall had a fantastic time reading this and gave it a 4.5-star rating. And then the last two books I read in the month of July were High King's Tomb and Black Veil in the Green Rider series, so book 3 and 4. And essentially Green Rider follows our main character Kerrigan, who is getting expelled from her school at Celium, and she's on her way home, but runs into a messenger of the king pierced by 2 black arrows, who on his deathbed begs her to take up his mission and deliver this important message to the king. And essentially the story goes from there. She's being chased by the person who tried to kill him as she tries to deliver this message, and obviously the scope of the story gets a lot bigger from there. You definitely get some politics and some bigger picture stuff with what's going on in the world. But yeah, overall, love this series, and High King's Tomb was a reread for me, but Black Veil was a first time read. So with High King's Tomb, I gave this a 4.5-star rating. I think the reread of this was like slightly less enjoyable than my first time read of it. I do really love that there's some interesting character moments in here with Kerrigan, especially because in the first couple books, she's kind of like the younger, more like rash character, and in here she kind of is like mentoring somebody that used to be more like her, and it's really interesting to kind of have that come full circle and then have her realize like kind of the traits that she had in the earlier books and how they could at times be annoying. So like that was kind of a fun dynamic to read about for sure. Definitely one of my favorite things about this series is how many little like clues and tidbits are included in here that tend to kind of make you wonder if they're foreshadowing. And that definitely continued with this book. I had a great time kind of trying to piece some little minor side things together and making some theories. There were even moments in here that kind of had me going back to look at a few details in First Writer's Call, book 2. And I definitely was able to craft some more theories, kind of like putting more of the pieces together. So there were definitely elements of the reread that were really enjoyable for me as well. I do think that kind of like the plot reveals and the progression of this story is more enjoyable on the first read through, and I think that's a large part of why I had the experience I did. But overall, I still really had a good time with this one and gave my reread a 4.5-star rating. And then I dove into Black Veil, and I did really like this installment. though not as much as I anticipated liking it. I thought that this might be a kind of a new favorite installment in the series for me, because I had heard that this is where the tone of the series kind of goes a little bit darker. And it does definitely go darker in tone, but the pacing of this one definitely feels different. So the first half of this is like pretty slow paced in comparison to kind of like the progression of the series. You have a lot of things in here that are kind of like slow to set up, and also things even in the second half where things pick up that are still kind of setting up things for the series. So there wasn't kind of a ton of like payoff and answers in this one necessarily, but you got a lot introduced to start to wonder more and more about. This did definitely have a really busy, entertaining ending with a cliffhanger that I'm glad that I can jump into book 5 very soon, because man, that would be a dreadful one to have to wait a while for. And I feel for Fina, because she did the first time she had to read this through. But yeah, I think that this one, just being that there was a lot set up here, it led to kind of like less payoff, and also just being that this was slower paced in the first half, it was just less of a favorite than I wanted it to be. The other kind of surprising thing with this one for me was that I enjoyed a lot of the side plot elements a lot more than the main plot in here. So obviously the main plot in here, we're going into Blackvale, hence the title, right? But I kind of wished that that element of the story kind of had been explored a little bit more, because I feel like we didn't really get a full sense of what Blackvale was like. I mean, we kind of got like the odd experience of the characters there. But I was really hoping that this kind of would be more atmospheric and we spent more time kind of figuring out things in Blackvale. And then also things in the ending of this one went a little bit more intangible, I guess, than I wanted. There are definitely some things that I have questions on for sure that I'm hoping to get answers to. But yeah, still really solid reading experience. Love all of the development that happens in this one, but do definitely have some nitpicky complaints, but I gave it a 4-star reading and still had a really good time with it, and I'm very eager to continue with the series, especially after the ending of this one. Oh, and I forgot to mention, but there were some really satisfying character moments in this installment as well that I had a good time reading. So that was it for all the books I read in the month of July. But let's kind of quickly touch on my August reading plan, since I didn't make a separate dedicated TBR video. And for September, I always do what I call Sequel September, where I try and prioritize reading all kinds of sequels for series that I'm in the middle of and see how much progress I can make, because one of my yearly goals is always to finish some dang series. So in August, being that I'm still behind on a couple read-alongs, I definitely want to prioritize the standalones, because at least if I'm still behind on some sequels, then they can fit into Sequel September, and I can feel like I'm kind of really crushing progress towards that specific goal in September. So let's start off with Thrill, Chill, or Kill. I am behind a couple months on that, so I do want to try and get Stillhouse Lake, as well as With a Vengeance by Riley Sager read. And one that I already read so far in August was the Thrill, Chill, or Kill pick for August, Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. And then for the John Mars read along, I am a little bit behind. I have one to catch up on with Her Last Move. And I have started this one and I'm enjoying it so far. I definitely have some questions based on what's introduced in the first few chapters. And also the pick for August was The Marriage Act, which I have also already read and finished. So I'm happy to say that I'm making some progress on my August TBR at least. And those are kind of like the 5 standalones I really want to make sure I prioritize. But beyond that, moving on to sequels for read-alongs, I am a little bit behind on. I definitely want to get to Green Rider 5 after the ending of 4, so that would be Mirror Sight. And August pick, if I have time, is Firebrand. And then also there is like a short story novella that comes after book 6 that I may have time to get to, called The Dream Gatherer. So I have that out for my TBR cart. And then our fantasy read along for the Bookish Drummer Discord is Dungeon Crawler Carl, and I am only 1 book behind on that. So I have The Gate of the Feral Gods and The Butcher's Masquerade. So hopefully I have time to get to those, because I've really been enjoying my read of that series so far. And then the only other thing I'm going to put on my TBR for August is The Trial of Rooker Flynn, which is the second Locke Institute book by A.R. Witham. And the reason for this is that book 3 releases in early September. So the first thing I pick up in September is going to be book 3, hopefully, which means I have to get book 2 read. So yeah. But I had a really good time with book 1 in the series, and I'm definitely curious to see where the story goes from here. So definitely really looking forward to picking that up and getting back into that series as well. So that was it for all of the books I read in July and the books I plan to pick up in the month of August. Let me know down below in the comments, what was your favorite read of July? What are you most looking forward to in August? And did you have similar or different experiences to any of the books that I read in the month of July? As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye!